Hello, and welcome to our today's open hour session for our employee referral product. My name is Jana Achilles. I'm Senior Customer Success Manager here at Clever Connect, and today I have with me Veronica. And
Hi, Anna.
and we're talking today about how to boost activity and foster application quality within your employee referral program. Before I hand over the microphone to Veronica, I would like to give you a little bit more insights on how the webinar is structured today. We will have an agenda. Veronica will present a lot of information, give you lots of insights into how gamification works and how you can also foster application quality within your referral program. And if you want, you can ask questions anytime. You can use the questions section on the bottom right hand side. And other participants will be able to also upload the questions that you have. And then in the end, we will basically answer all the questions, or I will interrupt Veronica and ask her directly during the session. Yes, then Veronica, stage is yours. Maybe you can introduce yourself for a few, say, moments, and then we jump right into the topic.
Yeah, hi. Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me here in your open hour. So my name is Veronica. I've been with Clever Connect, or like the former company Teletree, for over 6 years by now, and I'm actually leading the customer success management team that's located in DACH, but as well in Spain and in Italy. And we've decided on talking a bit about like application quality, how we can engage and keep our users engaged, what we will do, or we as a company and as a software are doing for it, but also like what you as the like kind of like end user of some sorts can do to get the most out of your referral platform. So we are talking a bit in terms of the agenda about like how important communication is, why transparency is a main driver for engagement. Then we will focus a lot on the gamification module that we have, and why it's important, what setups you can do, and what guidelines you have to follow. But that should not be all that we are talking about. It's also about like what you can do outside of gamification to foster the quality of your applications. We estimate for this to take around 30 minutes, plus minus a bit. It depends also if there is a lot of questions, if there are any remarks. And then we do have a very decent buffer for further questions to be answered and asked in that regard. Feel free to interrupt also at any time and utilize the question box that Jana just introduced. So yeah, let's get started then. So communication and transparency, I want to focus a little bit of like what we as a software provider do in terms of like engagement, like keeping people up to speed, and transparency. So all of you have gone through the onboarding process on our side when you have been basically, you started with the referral platform, with the employee engagement platform, and communication is one part where we put the biggest emphasis on. Like it's super important that your employees know what they are in for, know what the company is doing for, know what they can get out of this situation. So having this transparency makes participation fun and rewarding at the same time. So there's a few things that are built in from our side, and that is the engagement mailings. So we've built an automated engine that fosters transparency, like completely without any of your doing. So we do have newsletters that can be set up like to be sent in a certain rhythm. And those newsletters have dynamic titles, so they are not your standard, always look the same kind of like newsletter, but they do tell the user, hey, since the last newsletter, we have like X amount of new jobs, like a certain amount of news stories. So they should feel engaged. There's a few highlights that are matched to the specific user through an algorithm. And therefore it should be rather engaging there. But this is not where it stops. Like there's application updates. So did somebody apply to the share that I did? Like, did that person like get hired or rejected in the end? But then also, like if you haven't been active for a while, because that's also something natural to happen, we will send a reminder about that to your user. Those are all actions, like you literally set them up or allow them to be sent at the very beginning of your of the onboarding journey, and then it will just happen and continuously like nurture your user base. Then we also do offer like in-app notifications. Like granted, most of them are for gamification users, but gamification generally comes with your referral package, whether you use it or not. So it's about like that every rewarded action like gets actually a notification. So I have shared, so I get like a pop-up banner either in the mobile app, in the native mobile app, or on the web app that lets me know, great thing, you now shared. And then also when I return, maybe a day later, maybe the afternoon, only a few hours later, or maybe a week later, I will be greeted by a pop-up that tells me like what this share has come up to. Like, hey, like you've received 15 clicks on your share since you've been last on the platform. So that's super cool because it lets the user know what's happening in the background. Like the sort of thing that I really kind of cannot follow otherwise. Like, especially since every social media platform like kind of interprets those sort of things a bit differently. So on LinkedIn, if we look at that, there's something that's called views, but that's literally means like the people that are targeted and have potentially scrolled over a certain post. So that doesn't mean it's a click, like the people have actually engaged with it. So like that, we give what we can give and let the user know that there was a click, for example. And then me as a user, I can watch my point account like grow, and I also can look into where the growth is coming from. So I hope you have hit, and that's something that's even there if you don't use gamification, the activity feed. Like if you're logged in as a user, you do see that people have applied, you do see which channels you used to share, what job it has been that you have been shared, like if there was an application, etc. Like when you switch on gamification, it will be expanded by just that bit of more information. Like those actions, like on that share, those clicks, those applications now equal a certain amount of points that you have received. And then something that's not completely tied to gamification, but certainly has the same thought in the background, is the badges that we offer. So those badges is something that have a fixed threshold, and like it's something, if you're used to Audible, for example, where you can get a night owl or something like that, or like you listen to an audiobook for a certain amount of time, like this is the category those badges fall into. So we want to like give you kind of like a medal for your first share, for your first job share, for your first story share, for your first few sets of clicks, for applications, etc. But that is not where it stops. Again, there are some activities that you as a recruiter can do to even enhance this transparency and let the user know. So we do have an ERP campaign feature that allows you to target certain campaigns to, for example, specific departments, specific locations. You can append jobs to that one. If you're a stories user, you can allow for push notifications to be sent when a story is getting published. And then also we do support like with the invitation feature that even not fully registered like potential users at that point will stay up to date. Like it's super easy for them to like find the access to the referral platform, but B also just get the newsletter, like it's a little bit of an altered newsletter, but they will receive in the same sequence that the regular users do a newsletter of some sorts that triggers them and reminds them that it would be a cool idea to actually sign up. So that is the whole realm of transparency. And now I want to focus a bit about like the overall topic of gamification. And the first question is potentially like, why? But why should I use it? Like, what's the difference? We're already paying for a successful hire, so why should I go the extra mile? So I want to focus a bit on hiring reward versus gamification incentive, because they are two very different things to start with. So the hiring reward is obviously something that everybody kind of auto connects to a referral like program in a company. So it is the reward that I as a referrer get if I successfully referred a person to start at our company. So it's super fixed. It might even be standardized. It's set by you as an employer. Like there's certain rules that apply. But then if we look at from a user point of view, or like me as the employee that might get that reward, there's a huge disconnect in time. So I am sharing, the person is applying, maybe like when they have time on the weekend to really curate their application. Then they go through a whole process of application process. And then maybe your setup for the referral program is set in a way that you only pay out after the probation period. So if we look at like the action of the user versus like when the payout is happening, and that payout even is somewhat like hidden in a like bonus slip in my standard paycheck payout, there might be like months, if not like 3/4 of a year, at least like half a year in between. So it's not really super engaging if you look at it from that angle. And there's a lot of dependency also on the elements that the employee cannot fully influence. So obviously recruitment has to do their job, and they should do their job, and that means like you have to be picky about the people you hire, but nonetheless, like the employee is doing something for the company at that point. Like they are engaging with people that are in their network, people that might potentially otherwise not even have found that job. Like they make them apply, like they are doing something more promotion wise for your employer branding. And this is where gamification comes in. That's like the thing on the other side, where you have that kind of like immediate incentive for ambassador action. So make really every action count. So it's the share, like it's the first step, it's the first hurdle that the employee took. It's like the click that's then happening from the external, and then like an application and potential application progression. So it can be more diversified. So because it's not that huge chunk at the end that's like connected to the hire, it can be small incentives, it can be super diversified, and the employee can choose also their goal potentially. The overall gamification setup is customizable, quick to change, and also quick to implement if you want to. And then there's like the full transparency, like start to end of like how did those points come into my account. Basically, this is where in the recruiting process the employee is like completely outside, like they yes no in the end, like hired or rejected. But here I really know like the engagement, like I know this is the clicks that my share have produced, this is like the application that I have induced, etc., etc. So this is the general underlying trigger why you should start using gamification, or why it might be a smart idea if you struggle a bit with like keeping your employees engaged. And I mean, talking from a German perspective, we are very like shy to use some stuff, right? And we're like, yeah, but I don't know who I could refer. Like, I don't even know if I have somebody in my network. And this is exactly where, if we incentivize those like beforehand actions, we can trigger to unleash some of that, like some of that possibility. And we have, all of us have a huge network that's like mostly probably passive. So obviously we don't know all the CVs, we don't know where the people are at, but that's exactly where a lot of chance comes in for the employer, for you as an employer. So if we look at the gamification process, like I think a few of you use it, others don't. So I just want to briefly browse through it. So the employee can choose an individual goal from the options that are given, and the options are purely according to what you want to provide as options. Then you can retrieve points for sharing jobs and stories. You can retrieve points through clicking and applications. And then there's the full transparency on your account. So here's a small screenshot where you see the bar rising with every like new login, like you get that kind of instant reward. And then once you've hit a certain threshold, you can exchange the points for the rewards that are provided. So that's like how the general process of gamification is built on our side. And then the question is towards you more, like, what do I do with my reward shop? Like, how is that reward shop design gonna look like? And the reward shop design is like how the incentives, like how do we build up the incentives, but also what am I willing to give to my users basically for certain actions? So how do I set up the point structure? So on the incentive side, like it's about creating rewards that the users will like. So that might be something you know already because you have some similar elements in your company, but that might also be something you don't know yet. So you have to learn first, or you can even like start questions around your peer group, etc. It's super important, I think, to stay true to the company's values with what you offer. So if you are corporate social responsibility, like climate partner would be a Munich startup, for example, I don't think it makes sense to like promote Amazon vouchers, for example. And then there's like the controlled budget through the smart money ratio to human made limits, basically. So the money ratio is, for example, if I offer just a teapot, a mug, I know for me as an employer, like buying it, it costs €7. So how much do I think people should need to work for like something that equals €7 versus if I offer a free day of work for me as an employer that costs me like potentially even €1.5 to €2,000. So there needs to be a good offset in between the things that you offer. And then the second part is that with your point structure, you can foster the desired behavior. What do I mean by that? So first of all, it depends potentially where your budget is coming from and what you are actually looking for and what you want to achieve. But a certain activity equals a certain worth basically for you and your company. So it's the question about sharing. It's a very low hurdle kind of action. It's super nice to have an instant reward, but should it really take a huge chunk of how the employees are collecting like into their points account? Or is it the clicks? Like I really want to foster, for example, broad social sharing. Like they should share, depending in which way you work in, right? They should share on GitHub, on Stack Overflow, on LinkedIn, Xing in Germany, on Indeed. Or should they go into one-on-one, like more conversation, like more targeted approach with a referral program? It might also very much depend if you are a user that has, or if you are a company that uses stories versus you are a company that doesn't use stories, because stories per default are a bit meant for like a broader audience, whereas a job might not necessarily be in how you view it. And then also the application quality can be really part of like how you incentivize. So you might not necessarily give points for the initial application to come in, but you want to reward every application that goes through the hurdle of a telephone interview, so that wasn't rejected at the very first glance, or even further steps up for it to be really reflected on the employee like employee side of the account. And then it's like the transparency all throughout, because that setup is like visible in the user account to see. People like referral users are getting, or should get, like, and should become a bit smarter in how they trigger their actions, right? If I know clicks, there's a heavy reward on clicks. Like I want to share onto broad social media. If there's a heavy reward on application quality, I might even train the person that's applying a bit. Like I'm trying to give them the best kickstart possible, and help them be their best selves when they apply, and really qualify potentially first the person that wants to apply on my side before I just make them apply with the company. So that's all the elements that you need to think about when you think about your reward shop as a whole. And then there's like the gamification setup. So the question is now, how can I do it, basically? So the setup options don't seem like a lot, but actually it opens a very broad spectrum of what you can do. So first of all, you have to decide if and how many points can be gained through shares and clicks. Like shares and clicks is really like the kind of like smallest element that you can reward for. So what is it like? Because that's the part of the gamification that can be played if people would want to do that. So it can be played, and therefore like the thinking you have to have is a bit of, okay, how much am I willing to pay for people that like, where I don't necessarily have the full gain, like the full target, I don't reach the full goal of what I want to achieve. So you can set up limits like for like shares and clicks individual on a daily basis, but then also there's like a sum to this shares and clicks where we allow you to set a weekly or a monthly limit, and then you can decide on points per application as well. And I want to point out that on this application bit, like what we see is that certain markets behave very much different. So whereas we see in Central Europe, the trend is that people really only apply if they see a fit, compared to the application like forum. I see, okay, they are requesting 5 years of like work experience. I do have 5+ years of work experience, so I am a match, so I will apply. We see there's other tendencies in other markets. So especially when we go towards like Asian countries, etc., like there seems to like everybody seems to be applying to a broad scale of jobs, which you have to keep in mind if you operate in those markets, what you do and how you do it. And that's, by the way, also something that we support. So you don't need to have gamification actually be live in all markets. You can decide if gamification is available for all like globally, or if it's like restricted to certain locations, for example. And then I wanted to point out something that's like super new to the gamification family on our side, and that's actually the part where the application quality comes into play. So we want to reward certain application stages. So if I look at the customer's application pipeline, it might be actually a 12-step pipeline. If you look at the ATS, it might differ from whether you're a junior position, like a professional, or a senior position. So I think it's about, again, not rewarding every single step, but really challenging the application process that you have and where certain quality gates are hit. And those are the quality gates that we would suggest you to really take into consideration. Are like, hey, yes, there can be like a point here and there for shares and clicks, and there's also like the initial application, especially in like Central European markets, is worth a lot, but then also like certain quality thresholds, like, and they might outweigh those things even further. I don't think we will get to this today, but we will share the whole slide deck after the fact, and there is a backup, and we go into some calculation examples here as well, so you can get an insight into like the way of thinking that you can, or the approach that you can take to find a perfect setup for you. So there's those setup options that are like completely on your side, and you can define, and obviously like the difference between points you grant and then the incentives you give in your workshop is something to take into consideration as well. But then there's also some technological bits, like a smart fraud prevention sort of thing that we can offer, we do offer. It's like standard in our gamification offering. So to have full transparency, like we don't grant points if the IP address of the share equals the IP address of the X. Basically, if I share, even if I log out, if I go into like another browser tab, like it's the same IP address, or if it's my partner logged in from his device, like the same IP address, we won't grant points for that. Then we also don't award points for repeated clicks through the same IP address. So we are living in a world of data privacy and GDPR, so there's limits to this. So there is only a certain amount. I think it's 24 hours how long you can store an IP address. But at least like this randomly clicking like one after another won't work. So we won't grant points for that as well. And then also the system itself is smart enough that if I am logged in, or I actually hand my device to somebody else, but I'm logged in the background, the system realizes, hey, you are a user. Like whoever that device is, where this device is from, it belongs to a user, so no points are granted there as well. So let's move on to the two gamification concepts. So like that's very like broad looking at it, but there's like the sort of classic gamification setup that we offer or we suggest our customers to use versus like a raffle/lottery setup. The classic one means certain amount of points equals a reward on a very individual level. So I, as a user, I collect a certain threshold of points. I mean, I can like basically exchange it for a reward, whatever that reward might be. Whereas on the other hand, like a certain amount of points equals like a raffle entry, equals a lottery entry. Meaning, and this is where like the benefits, like the pros and cons are exactly like polar opposite between those two concepts. So we have on the classic one, obviously the guaranteed payout for each individual employee. That's something super cool, but you as an employer have to be aware that with this setup, no full budget control is possible. So what I mean by that is like you can't predict exactly how your users do want to use it. We don't know when we start potentially like how our signups are going up, like et cetera, et cetera. So there has to be a bit of flexibility in that sort of budget. Having said that, like that budget might not only be a recruitment budget, it might be spread across the company. There might be some budgets that's like specifically granted for that. And you can also add some blocks in here, right? You can say, okay, we want to provide iPads, but there's like 10 iPads that we can afford. And like once they're gone, for example. On the other side, it's pros and cons are polar opposite. So the con on the raffle lottery side is like that even though I do a lot of stuff as an employee, there's only a certain chance of winning. So I'm not guaranteed. But on the really very interesting part here is that I have complete and full budget control, meaning I kind of almost can lean back, look at what's happening, and don't even care that, for example, in Asian countries, like there's people applying like crazy people, and that there is now one share that has received 100 applications. So that is the like just two concepts, and depending on if you are very like hyper, like you have a hyper tight budget and there's only so much you can afford, but you still want the engagement, the transparency that comes with gamification, we would highly suggest to go with a lottery approach. But if there is some budget and you do see that like clicking, etc., is something that's doing something for your employer brand and you want to reward that, then by all means, like go with the classic approach. It's a super amazing approach for the users to take part in. So now I've shared a bit of like here and there, you need to be cautious about that. Like you need to think about possibly something else, etc. So I want to go into like the setup guidelines. There's a few questions you should ask yourself. So first of all, what goal do we have with our referral and like advocacy platform? So it's a bit the question continues. Do I want to foster continuous use, like a person logging in every month? I talked about weekly, monthly limits, like versus a more targeted use. Also, should it have a huge employer branding focus, or are we really only targeting the application focus? And that gives you an indication whether you want to give points more for shares and clicks, or like also reward them with like a certain threshold, versus potentially only points for applications. The next question is like, is it more the employee activity, or is it rather the candidate activity that I am looking at? So it's like shares and clicks are like, can be a lot induced by the employee and like how they handle the system, right? If I share on LinkedIn, or if I share actually in a curated Facebook group, for example, like there's almost a certain guarantee for some clicks happening. And then the other thing is the candidate activity, where there's only so much the employee can do for that, like for that to happen. So it's like the initial application/application progression. So it's about points for shares or clicks and the application submission, because that's also fairly low hurdle, versus the application progression, where it's like almost 100% on the candidate side of things. And then the one might argue potentially most important question is about budget. So the first question here is like individual goals. So I'm losing a little of predictability versus lottery full budget control. But the other thing that should be taken into account here is like, what sort of budget are we actually talking about? Because it's super easy for us to put referrals, like employee referrals, employee engagement, like in the bucket of recruitment. But what if it's not only recruitment? Like we are talking a huge chunk employer branding. Like we are doing like something for our recognition, like our brand out there. So what if we can expand the budget we think we have and take like other pieces of the cake when we talk about budget? And here it's again about like, it's in the end, like in terms of like the setup, you talk about the same things like shares, clicks, submissions versus application stage progression, but the weight is basically in the other direction. So if we have a broader budget, like if we do see the value of like that clicks, etc., then we might want to go towards the direction where we incentivize this type of behavior a bit more. And the really very black and white question that I suggest everybody to ask and answer themselves when they decide to go with gamification is always, how much am I willing to spend on people who play the system? Because even though there is fraud prevention, even though there is limits, there is always, and that makes it super unfortunate for the rest that are just using the platform the way it should be, but there's always a handful of people that try to take everything out of a situation like that. And if you think about that, like I have now set points for shares, for clicks, for applications, but I also have set up limits. So if I look at those limits and how they can be achieved, like, is it worth to me that I spend, let's say, 20 euros on an employee every 6 months, every 9 months, every other month, for example? Like, it depends also, I guess, what sort of gifts you already as a company already have, because there's the question about taxation as well. Like in Germany, for example, like there's small like giveaways, or like a small amount of money that you can give without getting into a taxation issue, etc. So that might be a factor, might to be factored in those questions. And then like the steps to success with the overall gamification approach. Like there's 4 really like steps that if you follow them, like we can guarantee you that this will help you get out healthy on the other side of gamification. Basically, once you introduce it to your employees, start small. Like start with a basic setup and actually collect data. This is what I said at the very beginning of the webinar. We can't predict how the users are using the system. Like, unfortunately, we would love to be able to, but start with a basic setup, set very harsh limits potentially, like, and have only a few incentives, because you can also see on the incentive side of things what people like check in at as their target. Like whether it's, for example, something that's more corporate social responsibility, or something that's very individual, like I get my cinema entry now, or hey, I can plant a tree, or hey, I will add to the donation of the company, or I can actually decide myself to donate it to somewhere else. But then also iterate fast. So you learn kind of like every day with gamification. You learn about your users, you learn about like how they engage, you learn about the user group, you see tendencies about like applications, like is the quality going down and up, like do we see also more traffic on our careers page due to that? Like that is some stuff that should be looked into. So make changes to counteract unwanted behavior, but also potentially foster wanted behavior, and build up your own approach according to that. And then set up those limits, like utilize the limits that you can have with our platform. It helps keep costs down, and it helps to create some predictability, even if you go like with the classic referral gamification approach. And then build up watertight rules. That's another thing. Like there is some rules that people have to obey to, and so allow for short notice changes, like stated in your data privacy, stated in your terms of use that like gamification, the offering of gamification, the certain like incentives that you offer are subject to change, and so are the thresholds that go with them, but also allow for legal measures if necessary. What do I mean by that? It's more about, right, if people really heavily trick the system, and we have seen that people might even use bots for stuff like that. Like obviously stuff can be tracked and we can prove that certain things are happening. So allow for legal measures so people are aware, hey, like this is not something that I can just play my employer. And then we've now focused a lot on like gamification and what you can set up and what it does to the application quality, but also to the engagement of your users. So I want to emphasize a few points that you can also really implement to further foster application quality. And that's like, yes, gamification, we discussed about that, like this new feature where you saw the new flag. You can now reward certain quality gates through additional points. So there's, for example, like a first interview, a second interview, like this is completely up to you. We can map it in your integration, like if that's something that we can retrieve out of your ATS. There is basically no manual effort. It's a small change that we will charge with a professional service in order to really build this one on your referral platform. But then there's two other, like from our point of view, very important things to do to have better application quality to begin with. And they don't only apply to Clever Connect and the referral program, but they apply to all your recruitment process. So first of all, through a clear and concise job ad. So, and I have the feeling sometimes like, you know, we're living in a world where we are all on LinkedIn, like we get approached daily and we have tasks. So, and I sometimes have the feeling that people don't understand what they're looking for to begin with. So there's a title, there's a very random job description, but then if you go into the details, if you want to understand what they are looking for, they sometimes don't know. So how would I as a candidate know that I could apply to it, or like if I don't understand? So make it very clear, like must haves, nice to haves, what's the job about, like where can you develop to even, and like that you create a certain set of hurdles, like outside of Asia. Because yeah, I've touched on that. And then also through the right questions in your application form. So what's too little versus too big of a hurdle? I see companies asking for like your phone number, your birth date, where you live, like your whatever, the name of your mother almost. A certain set of information is just not important. It might oppose a hurdle. Yet on the other side, it's super important for you as an employer to ask small questions that help you qualify the applicant's intentions as well. So it might be a question along the lines of like, what do you think will differentiate you from other applicants to this position? Or please explain in 3 short sentences your motivation for this position. So they might even be worth more than something you see on a very blunt CV, because like you can always tweak a bit, like what you did in this step of your career versus what you're like planning to do. Like you can really focus on the stuff that you want to focus on in the future, etc., etc. But this is where you get really a grip on why this person is applying to this position. And this is why I wanted to focus on that here as well again. And that actually, if I'm not mistaken, like would be the end of my monologue that's been dragging on now for quite a few minutes, and would open up like for some questions to be asked from your side of you. So is there any questions we should answer this?
Thank you so much, Veronica. To you, I haven't seen any question tapped so far, so I think if you because of that, I also gave you a little bit more in detail some of the topics. We can stop the webinar here. If it's like, okay, there are some open questions, do not hesitate, customer success manager, or to support maybe also more me in that regard. It's some really good points, and especially a very long time onboarded many customers, of few of them, even if she is. So she really got what has happened, what she's seen with customers. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of this. For everyone who participated. And recording, we will also share the slides. Yeah, we'll also give you some calculating how you could gamification setup. And have a nice afternoon or nice.
Thank you as well. Thanks for having me, and talk to you later, Jana.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining our webinar.